All right, Cecilia, thanks so much for being on this podcast. I truly appreciate it. First off, just tell a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the disability community.
Yeah, my name's Cecelia Black. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Seattle. Um, I'm in my mid 30s, white, long hair. Um, yeah, when I was 16, my family was in a car accident, and I was paralyzed from my chest down. So I'm quadriplegic, and I use a manual wheelchair. So that was obviously a huge life change that, being disabled or especially visibly disabled for the first time. And it really, I feel like it took me a long time to like really connect with the disability community and feel like, I was part of it. But um, yeah, and so I went to college. I went across the country to college, and moved to Washington, D.C. I um, then went to grad school later in Chicago, and there I went to grad school for public policy, and I had a lot of challenges just getting basic accommodations in grad school. And it was really frustrating. And it was especially frustrating because, I was in school for public policy to hopefully like be a part of a system that makes policies, better for people with disabilities. And I couldn't get basic needs to, take tests, or go to, even like physically go to class or study at a desk. And so I got connected with Access Living, which is a center for independent living in Chicago, and they're just do amazing all disability led organizing. And there, I joined a coalition of disability advocates working on housing. And so that was like my first taste into really, I'd been involved in organizing, but not for disability rights. And so that was my like first taste into disability led community organizing. And, paralleling that with all of my experiences at grad school and feeling like not represented whatsoever, not respected, and really, I think reaffirmed my commitment to disability justice and like really made me see myself as part of this movement and not, not other. And yeah, and from there I moved back home, or been back from where I grew up to back to Seattle in um end of 2016. And then the other kind of part of my journey into, disability organizing is I got involved with a wheelchair basketball team and then later wheelchair rugby. And I think that like that just like further made me realize how much I needed the disability community in my life. And uh, at the same time, I didn't see a lot of large disability organizing in Washington State until I got connected with Disability Rights Washington. And from there, um, yeah, this is long and winding, so feel free to interrupt me at any point. But I, been struggling to see disability organizing in Washington State like I had in Chicago with Access Living. And in 2021 or 2022, I started reading, in the news, all of these news articles about disabled transit activists who were, organizing Week Without Driving, and were really changing the conversation around transportation. And it like was so empowering to see one, disabled leaders just like written about in newspapers, like seen by the public as leaders. And also they were being cited as like, transportation experts, not disability experts, not just this like one little corner of transportation, but really being acknowledged for all the knowledge, for all of the expertise that they had. And so that just got me so excited. And that was led by my now boss, Anna Zivarts, who's a disabled non-driver. And from there, I just got more involved in everything that Disability Rights Washington was doing. I'd been involved with a lot of housing organizing, but not, you know, bringing the accessibility lens, but not really connected with the disability community again. And so in 2023, I started working at Disability Rights Washington, and I work on a program called Disability Mobility Initiative where we uh, work with and organize people with disabilities and non-drivers on issues of transportation and housing and all of the um, intersections that those issues have.
hmm It's great that you mentioned Disability Rights Washington because I remember in the first episode of my podcast, I had Noah Seidel, and he explained, what Disability Rights Washington is and how it helps people. So shout out to Noah Seidel. If you're listening, yeah, I rarely give shout outs, but yeah, so he's just an amazing person. Have you gotten to know Noah Seidel, or how did?
Yeah, Noah is an amazing person, and what uh awesome guest to have on one of the first episodes. I work with Noah. We work on different teams, so um yeah, I think he's just an amazing person and has such a great understanding of all of the different um, organizations and systems that impact people with disabilities and, especially different government agencies and non-government agencies. I think NOAA is like such a great resource to kind of like give the lay of the land of who's, working on disability issues and in what ways. So he's been a major resource to me.
Because what I was going to ask is to tell me a little bit about your role in public policy at Disability Rights Washington, because you were explaining that a little bit, but could you unpack that?
Yeah, I'll try to. Um, yeah, so like I said, we work on this program called Disability Mobility Initiative, and we work statewide. I now help lead it in Washington State. I was definitely not didn't start this, but again, Anna Zebart started Week Without Driving, which started in 2021 in Washington State as a challenge to get our elected leaders and decision makers to try to give up their car for a week and really understand what it's like for people with disabilities who can't drive and also, people who can't afford a car, who um, are too young, don't have a license, who've aged out of driving, who have a restricted license, and really understand what it's like. And you know and it was so important because most of our decision makers are drivers, and we feel the impact every day because our world is really made around cars and with the expectation assumption that you will have a car to get around, and that just um, places a huge barrier on so many people, especially the disability community. And so that's like one of our projects that we do, and we find, this is a challenge that we have every year in end of September, first week of October, and um, we really want people to. The purpose is not to it's not a game. It's not a competition of can you give up your car or not. It's really for people to understand so many ways where you like actually need a car or just how hard it is to, for example, be in public office when you need to get to so many places all in one day and how much longer it takes via public transportation. Or if you're in a rural area, just all of the options that aren't there. And so, we see like leaders really just gain like a new insight into our transportation system. And I think that has like some big impacts on how, public policy and how which policies that they pass and support and just how they view the legislation and programs that they implement. So that's one way, that's a big way that we work on public policy. I've worked a lot in the city of Seattle where with transportation, where our Department of Transportation receives about 30% of its money from a transportation levy. And, just to backstep for a moment, one of the big issues, as part of transportation is sidewalk accessibility.
hmm
That's one of the things that people, I think, gets missed when we're talking about transportation, just because when we think about transportation, we don't think about the connections between places. We think about like the bus service, but not how you get from your door to the bus service. And like so many of us know, like if you are in a wheelchair or if you're using a cane or if you can't, um, if you have low vision or blind and you can't see, where the road ends or, where the crosswalks are, where cars coming, the lack of sidewalks is just makes our lives so dangerous and so uncomfortable. Um, and so in Seattle, like so many other cities, uh, about a quarter of our streets don't have sidewalks altogether. Half of our sidewalks we have are broken. And so most of this money comes from the transportation levy. And so I like got to um, work with a lot of our other partner organizations that represent, so many different groups, worked on advocating to get more safety projects and sidewalk funding, included in the levy. And so that's another way that we work on policy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then uh, another way that we're working on policy is um, in Washington State, uh, every 2 decades, every city in Washington State, excluding very small cities, have to create a comprehensive plan that lays out all of the zoning in their city. So that means like where you can build apartment buildings, where you can, where single family housing is allowed, where industrial places are allowed. And what we know is that the way we've laid out our cities, prohibits so much housing that is required to be accessible. And so, it creates huge problems for finding accessible housing. And it also creates the sprawl where people are dependent on their cars and makes it really hard to create really strong active transportation networks. And so we've been working really hard to try to raise awareness for our city planners and for other advocates um, and around, how much uh, our zoning has impacted people with disabilities and limited our housing choices. So there's our
Mm-hmm.
three ways that we've been working on policy. Um, yeah, and we also um, worked at the state legislature. We passed some three like really exciting bills this year. Yeah, happy to get into any of those. I know
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of talking.
Because what I was gonna ask is, what can be done to improve accessibility? Because you were gonna mention that you guys had some bills passed through the legislature. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So one bill, the three bills that we passed was um, one, we helped support along with a lot of other disabled advocates to get a right to repair bill for wheelchairs passed. So if any of you, if anyone was in a wheelchair, you know how frustrating it is to deal with the two main companies that are dominate the wheelchair industry. And it can take, when your wheelchair breaks, it can take like weeks and months. And it is, if you do not go through those companies, it can be um, almost impossible to get parts or information you need to fix your chair yourself. And so this bill requires manufacturers to provide access to all the parts information for people to fix the chair themselves or, through an independent repair shop. So that was one bill that we worked on that just got signed on Monday by our governor. The second bill we worked on this year was to eliminate unnecessary driver's license requirements in job applications. And so, we see that so many jobs require a driver's license, even though that's not driving has nothing to do with their job requirements. And that impacts people with disabilities who are four times more likely not to drive, but also so many other groups who don't have driver's license. And so, that's prevents people, when people see a driver's license requirement who don't have a driver's license, they often just don't apply for the jobs. And then, they're not as competitive. And so employers are no longer allowed to ask for that. Um, and then the last bill that I'm like especially so excited about, and really, I think, to speak to your question of how can we improve accessibility, in Washington State, half of our, or two-thirds of our trans agencies, this is getting like really wonky, but they're called public transit benefit agencies. And really just what that means is created by the state legislature. And so by state rules, they're only allowed, their board, which the board members vote on, uh, all sorts of all sorts of policies and the budget that dictates all of the agency services. And these board members have to be a certain makeup of local elected officials. And so we got a bill passed that allows trans agencies to appoint um, two positions that represent transit riders to the board. And so they will have actual um, voting seats. So one of those seats will be a transit rider, and the second seat will be a community organization that works with transit riders. Um, and this, I mean, this just has huge impact. I think that so many of us have been on disability advisory councils for different agencies and departments. And
Hmm.
sometimes, depending on the department or the city or the agency, like that feedback gets incorporated really well. And other times it's just to have, it's just for show. It's just to have us give feedback. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so instead of us just providing feedback, it really puts us in position of power to like actually be part of the decision making. And so I think that's such a huge it's such a huge barrier that people with disabilities, are not very often in decision making positions, and that so the um decisions that impact us most are not decided by us. And so this is one step to make sure that the things that impact us is actually decided by us. And so I think it's, we all like, I think speak to the phrase nothing about us without us. And this is, I think, a
Yes.
really important step in that direction. So we're so excited about that. And now it's signed into law. And so now our next step is to really try to get folks appointed for on these boards, these trans agencies. Um, it's not required of trans agencies, but we've been hearing recently now that the bill's passed that there are, so many transit agencies that are really excited to appoint transit riders too. And so that I think that that's one step in making sure that our services are more accessible.
Hmm. What still needs to be done to make sure that, like you said, that there are some roads and curb cuts that are inaccessible? What can be done to sort of spur up the accessibility process? Because I remember Ezra Klein, he wrote this book when it comes to like building things or building new things, whether it's manufacturing or in this case building new sidewalks, that there needs to be like better sort of things need to be done faster. And because usually when you write a bill, you sign it into law, it can take a long time to develop. So from your perspective, what can be done to sort of create policies that sort of advance that accessibility at like jump started at a much faster pace?
Yeah, I don't know about much faster, but sidewalks are expensive. I mean, they're so expensive. I think we're on track to have a completed sidewalk network in 500 years, um, uh, which is just absurd, and it's awful. And our sidewalks have been seen as a luxury piece of the transportation system, not an essential part of our transportation infrastructure. And so a huge piece, not just sidewalks, but um, for so many issues, for equitable transportation, like the biggest barrier is funding. And right now we have, especially when it comes to so many things, but our transportation system, we still prioritize cars and roads, and we still prioritize um, car infrastructure that we know is dangerous and we know is bad for the environment. And so what we need is to really, um, you know, just totally change our transportation priorities and really demand that we fund things that we know is like we fund policies that we know is um, essential for safety, essential for accessibility, essential for the environment, and that will take a lot of organizing. I think it takes, we found in Seattle that the more we talk about sidewalks, it is now on the public's radar as something that's important. But that's taken, for so long, people didn't really understand how important sidewalks are to just people walking. People don't have the luxury of driving. And so we like have to really um, change, our priorities and our funding priorities. And so I think that it is going to take a lot of um, people with disabilities really telling their stories and pushing our elected leaders to, you know, when elected leaders say that they value the climate or they value accessibility, we really need to follow up and say, well, then how are you funding that? Because right now your funding priorities aren't aligned with what you're saying you value.
Hmm. It's sort of like this idea of like, you know how people they on Earth Day they have all these t-shirts, I support the earth, but they don't actually do stuff to recycle to take care of our planet. So it's similar in those ways. But to kind of wrap this up, will you guys be doing like any bills or like to really improve transportation like further? What's coming up on your end?
What's coming up? I mean, uh, the biggest thing that we're working on right now, I think we'll definitely be continuing to work on different policies. I think that we really want to work a lot on housing policies as well. Um, one of the housing issues that we've been talking about, thinking about is right now that, um, and this is in Washington State, multifamily buildings are required to have 5% of their units be fully wheelchair accessible. And I think people in wheelchairs who have tried to find apartments know that that's just not adequate and that these are things that everybody wants. And so that's something that we are hoping to work on is to increase the requirements for accessible housing. And I think we're just continually trying to push um, for better funding. Just yeah, better transportation funding, and just really push back on so many of these projects that are so expensive and are really going in the wrong direction. And the last thing I just like really want to plug Week Without Driving, because we know that this has had it really does have an impact on our elected leaders and our decision makers. I think so many people just have never thought about what it's like to be a non-driver. And I know I get, asked questions like, well, I'm blind or low vision, or I don't have access to a car. I'm already a non-driver. So how do I participate with Week Without Driving? And we really need people to ask their elected leaders, to ask their decision makers to take this challenge, but also to tell their story. And and really like give elected leaders a reason to take this challenge and know that their constituents this is are impacted by their decisions every day. And so that's, we really, so that's a big thing that we're working on. It's this year, it is September 30th through, oh my gosh, I should have looked this up, through October 5th, I think. It's a week. It starts the very last Monday of September, and it goes through the week. And so that's a challenge that we really ask everybody to join us in and really try to um, challenge the people in our lives and who are running our agencies to participate.
How important is it for people to really be educated about accessibility issues and issues around transportation?
Uh, it is it is so fundamental to changing policies and I think this is why that driving can be so powerful because we really need people with disabilities to be telling their stories to elected leaders. Um, and I think that, uh, yeah, stories have a huge impact in getting, in the, I think one of the most powerful ways to understand all of the accessibility issues is to, try to navigate around your city, but also try to navigate around your city with someone with a disability. And so if you our person, I know it's contacting your elected leaders and decision makers. That's such a um, it's a hard thing to like figure out what's the best. How do you actually do that? How do you navigate with that? You don't, so often we email our electeds and we get no response. It just goes into the vacuum. But We've Without Driving, it's in Washington State. We've been doing this now for 4 years. And so it's so many electeds know about it. And we do have a lot of tools on our website of how to ask legislators and their staff. But, we found like some of the most powerful and most impactful experiences is when we, do a bus ride along with electeds with someone with a disability or a group of people with disabilities, or we've done I know my friend who's in Tacoma has had invited electeds to try to navigate around her bus stop to a meeting. And so really, like, I think that firsthand experience is some of the best education, and really getting to do that with people who are disabled and able to point out things like, I actually can't just, walk in this you know, grass shoulder on the side of the road, or I can't just step up onto that bus stop where there's no curb. And so, I think that it's been such a powerful way to educate our decision makers on accessibility in our transportation system.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and uh, our website's weekwithoutdriving.org, and there is a lot of resources to try to figure out how to plug in. But and so I think that that's just one powerful way to kind of start those conversations.
Yes, I'll make sure to add it in my show notes once I upload it. Alrighty.